Welcome to everyone in person and everyone online on our Zoom. Thank you so much for coming to the final installation of our Builders Without Borders talk series. This is 6 out of 6 of a talk series that is a continuation of our program collaboration with the Smithsonian Mass Humanities called Museums on Main Street. So we had held a traveling exhibit from the Smithsonian in 2022, and we did a whole host of programs that were based on that exhibit's content, and that was Crossroads, and it was centered around rural America. So we did a host of programs, and they told us to pick our favorite and do a spin-off and do another 6 programs based off of that one. And so naturally, our favorite program was the Shipbuilders Roundtable, where we brought a bunch of shipbuilders together to talk. And the one piece of feedback we got was it wasn't long enough, and every single person deserved their own hour to speak. So we decided to break that up, and that's how we ended up with this talk series. And so we livened it up and invited local shipbuilders as well as some from away. So without too much more blathering on, I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker, Graham McKay from Lowell's Boat Shop in Amesbury.
Water.
I have known Graham for many years now, kind of just as a deckhand sailing, and he was the handsome standby captain who would stop by sometimes. So,
I don't know that.
so with that,
So you're one of the people I know just because I know them.
Yeah.
Like I don't know when I know you, but I just know you. I can't tell you that.
Well, come on over and speak into the laptop, but also at the crowd.
Oh, I see.
Because I didn't have a microphone for you.
That's okay.
But there is a little pointer if you need to.
Great. And these people are seeing me here or there, or are they seeing me at all?
Yeah, they can see you from that camera. I tried to point it up, so yeah. Okay. Because you're tall.
I can use this thing and see if it works.
It might not. It didn't.
Okay.
For some reason.
We'll just do it.
All right.
How do you make it dominant on this screen?
Oh, that's Pam. I know Pam. Hi, Pam.
Hi, great. Yeah, you're just a little postage stamp. How do you become dominant?
I think you want to see the picture rather than me.
Well, not really.
Can you see the presentation, Pam?
It's a little postage stamp.
The presentation is? Or me?
The presentation is, no, you are a postage stamp.
I think she needs to click on.
Small, but the picture of the Dory Shop is big.
Okay, great. So the presentation's live. This is a real free-for-all over here. I like it. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I love the Shipbuilding Museum here in Essex. It's been part of my life, time immemorial for me. And just because I'm into these things, clearly, and that's why I've chosen to do it as a profession. But again, I know most of you, but I'm Graham McKay and the director of Lowell's Boat Shop in Amesbury, and we are a very similar organization to the Shipbuilding Museum here, similar size, similar mission, and we trade a lot of staff, which is nice. But we're all into the same things, and I'm glad we can collaborate on this. What I'm going to tell you guys about tonight is a project that sort of grew out of Lowell's with some friends of mine who are also dory builders, and a project that sought to record this history of Milford Buchanan and his process of building dories. And you would think that boat building has been written about over and over and over again, but this particular process is of interest. And has anyone here been to the Shelburne Dory Museum? A couple of you, really? Really? Shame on some of you. Some of you schooner sailors. I only went once when I went to get ship knees from David Westergaard up there with Nate Piper like 10, 12 years ago for the Gundalo. It was my first time there. I didn't know it existed. It's got a very small internet footprint. And so a very small footprint altogether, and you kind of have to stumble upon it to know that it's there. And again, I've been doing this for a long time, and the fact that it's not more part of my life is kind of shocking, considering what is there and how similar it is to Lowell's, and how its path to being a museum is so similar. So I'll get right into it and ask questions at any time. Apparently, you all online can talk as well, but I can't see you. So if you have a question, just yell it out, I suppose, and we'll see. Ask it in the chat. Are you? Ask at the end. Are you right? Oh, great. We have a moderator over here. So go ahead if you online. If you have a question, just put it in the chat there, and we'll get to it at the end. So we've called this the Dory Heritage Project, and this is the first part of that project. This was the most, let's see, it was the wound that was bleeding the most. We'll call it that, in that Milford Buchanan. Maybe. No, wait. Oh. Getting there. There he is. Oh, just hit the thing. This is Milford. Milford's been building at the Shelburne Dory Shop since 1998. He is in his late 60s, and I hope he's not listening. He's not the picture of health. His knees are shot, and he's retiring. He retired actually this past year as the dory builder up there. And as I get into this, you will see why he is so important. But the idea behind this project and this particular build with Milford is that we wrote a book about it, similar to the Dory book, that recorded this whole process, that's currently at the publisher. So will be out hopefully before the end of the year. But this is Milford in the Dory Shop up there in Shelburne, where this shop, again, if you've been to Lowell's, how many of you have been to Lowell's? A lot of you. Great. Is not too dissimilar. It's a lot smaller, but pretty much the same situation all around. And it was the brainchild of this gentleman, Brad Dimmick. And Brad, I mean, if I love dories, Brad really loves dories. And he met Milford on a road trip at some point, and you can read through all that if you really want to. But it's myself and this guy, Brad Dimmick, and Cricket Rust, who they build river dories out west in Arizona. And Douglas Brooks, who some of you may have heard of. He has spent his entire career documenting Japanese boat building techniques, and I figured that his documentation process would be very helpful up here in Shelburne. And so the four of us came together and essentially started the Dory Heritage Project, which is an offshoot, if you will, of Lowell's. Lowell's being the umbrella under which we could fundraise to do this project, and then headed up to Shelburne. Here's Brad and Cricket out west. So this is their boat shop. They have a very, very, very big following out there. The river rafting community is very big, and they're very, let's see, cliquey is not the word I'm looking for. Again, I'm sorry if you guys are listening out there. Not cliquey. They love to hang out and build boats and party. And so we have these two at Lowell's to teach, try to have them once a year. And they bring people in from all over the country who want to come in and build these river dories, which are spruce and plywood and fiberglass and putty and all that kind of thing. But they build them so that they can get wrecked on the sides of the canyon and then get put back together and go back up. So Brad and Cricket. And here's Douglas Brooks. And these are the kinds of things he's been doing. So Douglas is he's in Japan at least once a year. And he has been, if you don't know Douglas, he headed to Japan post-college, learned that he was interested in wooden boats, and he went around and he saw that all these boat builders were all 70 or 80 years old. They had no heir apparents, and the knowledge that they had was going to die with them. And so he's made it his life's work to apprentice under them, learn their methods, and record it for the future. And so, again, perfectly suited to this project. Then there's me, Milford. So I'm coming from the Lowell's tradition, which is much less intact tradition than exists up here in Shelburne. But I know Dory's and pretty darn well at this point. And Milford and I are sort of contemporaries, I would say, in that respect. And so I was there for that knowledge and to sort of draw comparisons between how we do it and how the old feller done it. And that's that's how Milford talks. So the book is called Building the Shelburne Dory, How the Old Feller Done It. Because Milford has taken great care to not change a whole lot and to keep building the dories the way he was shown by the old feller, who's Bill Cox, by the way. So a little bit of history. Now, this shop in Shelburne actually grew out of the shops in Amesbury. So in 1870, this guy, Isaac Crowell, working on a fishing schooner, ended up in Gloucester, made his way up towards Salisbury Point, and started working in one of the shops up there, learned how to build dories, took that knowledge back to Shelburne, Nova Scotia with him. He taught the Etheringtons up there how to do it, and then eventually John Williams learned from them and started his boat shop here in 1880. So this knowledge directly from Lowell's up to Shelburne in the 1870s, 1880s. So where we're established 1793, they're almost 100 years after us, but they're coming into being right in the heyday of the demand for fishing dories. Where we could do 6 or 7 boats a day, these guys did a dory a day out of their shop, which was also pretty good production. And but again, they have a much smaller shop than we do. They have essentially one of our 3 buildings to work from in a much smaller crew. But you can see the shape is not too dissimilar from our own. So the reason this is such a pure, if you want to call it that, tradition is because of this guy, Sidney Mahaney. So if you think that shop opened in 1880, 34 years later, this guy shows up as a teenager to work, and he stays there for, 80 years? And so he undoubtedly worked with some of the original boat builders who had been taught from the original tradition from Lowell's, and he carried that all the way through his life into the early 90s. And he built hundreds of thousands of boats over his lifetime. And then he taught his son, Curtis Mahaney, who's in the middle there. And this guy on the left, Bill Cox, he and his brother worked in their family dory shop, also in Shelburne, for a number of years. And he purchased this Shelburne Dory Shop in the 50s and employed Sidney Mahaney. And then Curtis was working with his dad, Sidney. And then Milford here on the right learned from both of these 2 guys. We learned from, Bill learned from doing it in his own shop, and Curtis learned it from his dad, Sidney. So if you follow the line from 1880 to current day, it's not a whole lot of people. And this, relative to Lowell's, it's hundreds of people, and it's a tradition that's been broken several times over. It's still strong, but the most notable breaks, I would say, are World War II. All the boat builders at Lowell's were conscripted to go to the Navy Yard in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The shop was fairly inactive those years. And then post World War II, the focus of the shop really changed away from dories into recreational craft. And then when the Odells sold the shop in the 70s, again, a lot of the stuff, meaning the artifacts and the dory patterns, got scattered, but the tradition also got broken when the Lowells ceased to be the head of the operation. So we still have a lot of that, but I wouldn't say, unlike Milford, I'm not 5 people from 1880, from that knowledge that existed in 1880. So 1998, did you read that back part? Mm-hmm. So the Shelburne Dory Shop in 1983 became a museum, just as Lowell's is today. And Curtis was working there. Mahaney was working there, and Milford took over in 1998 up there as their dory builder. And so, again, one of the things that's threatened. Milford's not young, and his health isn't any younger. And this guy is fantastic. This is McKay. He actually lives in New Hampshire. He's got a house in Nova Scotia. He met Milford 14, 15 years ago, walked into the shop one day, and Milford needed help. So he stayed and he helped him, and he's never left. So he goes up there every summer, helps Milford out. And this is a seasonal operation, mind you. Again, like Lowell's, there's no heat, no nothing, but it's even more primitive. As you see these photos, they're all dark because they can only afford like 6 light bulbs in this place. But they've taken great care not to change anything, or to change as little as they possibly can from what was. And so there's barely electricity, barely any light other than ambient light up there. And there's one main power tool, which you'll see in a minute, but the rest is all hand tools and all old patterns, as the old feller done it. And one of the reasons this tradition has remained so pure is that there isn't a lot of movement up there of people. And when Shelburne was first founded, it was a huge town, and then the landscape couldn't support farming, and so everybody moved away and left a very small fishing community. But classic, I'm going to put it to you this way. Milford, when I asked him if he's been to the States, he said no. When I asked him if he's been out of the country, he said no. When I asked him if he's been out of the province, he said, I've been to Moncton a few times, and I went to Toronto once. So no one's moving around up there. And in Shelburne, that was a fairly common story when I would meet people and I would implore them to come to Lowell's, come to the States. Most didn't have a passport, and many hadn't left the province. So a town that is born and stays pretty much where it is. And that's how this tradition can remain so pure. We're also not without external threats. And so when we were up there, that's when Nova Scotia was having these major wildfires. And so the Dory Shop we were in right there, and daily these fires would stoke up both on this side and across the harbor, to the point where we almost had to evacuate one day. But I couldn't give this talk without at least showing this photo. The other thing about Shelburne that is interesting, and it's very old timey. So this was the set for the Crucible, I believe. Yeah. They filmed a couple of movies here, but back when they filmed the Crucible, the movie company came in, they buried all the overhead power lines and all that sort of stuff. So it looks, or can look, very much like the colonial era or even before. And so a couple of movies have been filmed here since for that reason. It's a cut and paste movie set. So in 1900, they invested in this, the Crescent Universal Woodworker. So if you see under there, it's all belt driven underneath. One big electric motor. Wouldn't have been there in 1900, but that was later added. And runs the bandsaw, runs the joiner, runs the table saw on the other side. There's also sticking off the wheel of the bandsaw, just a chuck, so you can chuck a drill bit up horizontally. I don't know what that's good for, except holing your thigh. But there it is. But when that thing's on, everything's on. So you better watch your toes, is all. But again, I'm pretty certain they bought a new saw blade sometime in the 80s and a new bandsaw blade sometime in the 90s, but they're still on the machines, dull as can be, and you have to sit there and physically push on the belt, tension it to get more juice to cut on the table saw, things like that. But and now it's a historic piece. and it's actually it's an amazing piece of historic engineering. But you can see as you look around, corners full of various boat parts and stuff, patterns all over the walls. It looks like home to me. And here's the construction process, and as it relates to us at Lowell. So this is a plan actually I drew of the boat that we built from the measurements I took off of the boat that we built with Milford. And I didn't draw this from scratch. I actually modified a drawing of a Lowell's dory that I already had, and I had to change very, very little. I altered some of the measurements and some of the lines, and it was by a half an inch here, a quarter of an inch there. It really was very, very close to our dory, which is interesting that when I say our dory from the 30s, 1930s. So the two were very, very close, which made sense in the day when you're trying to sell dory. These would have fit inside of ours, and ours would have fit inside of theirs on the deck of a schooner. Lunenburg dories, no, not so much. They've way more rocker, look much more like a banana. And those two would not have mated terribly well. And one of the innovations that Isaac Crowell brought up from Salisbury Point was this, and this is the construction of the frame being put together with a clip rather than having to go find a grown knee. How the builders in Nova Scotia were building with grown knees at the time, which are expensive, hard to procure. And so this innovation allowed them to make a lot more dories a lot less expensively. And it would appear as though, again, they built this bench in 1880 for doing that, and it's the one that is still used. So you chalk up these two guys, you have a pattern, and then that stays the same, and this guy moves around with these nails to the right angle, and then you stick them together, clamp them down, and then you run a saw curve through there to make the joint tight. And you can see this has been replaced a couple of times, and that's all chewed up in the back. And then when you get it right, you stick the clips together. But I mean, that's been used. That does not look modified or updated since 1880 to me. And these boats are all still being built with galvanized clench nails and galvanized wood screws, boat nails, the whole thing. Not a lick of bronze in it anywhere. And patterns for everything. There wasn't a lot of measurement being done because all of these patterns just existed. In this case, this is the pattern for beveling the stem. That side there is for the face. That side there is for the side for your bearding line. Run it up once, run it down again, and you're done. And there were a handful of these for the planking bevels and all that. No plans, no measurements, nothing like that. And this is a tradition here that probably did exist at Lowell's that I had not seen. And so, cotton wicking here, you drive a nail in almost all the way, leave it protruding maybe a quarter of an inch. You wrap the cotton wicking around it, run it to the next nail, all the way along. That's the garboard seam right there on the bottom. Once you get it wrapped around, you hit the nail in and ties it down. You go to the next one, and that leaves a nice bead of caulking right inside that plank all the way along. Again, that may or may not have been done at Lowell's, but that's one of the things that's been lost to time.
Which part of that, like not nailing it down or having the cotton?
Having the cotton in there at all. At Lowell's, they'd leave a gap. They'd overplane that bevel and leave a gap in the garboard, and then try to work cotton into there. But you couldn't force it in because you'd force the plank away from the bottom. So you had to kind of lightly push it in there and then putty over the top, which doesn't seem like too great of an option to me, even today. And a lot of things are the same. So this is the same exact method we would use to bevel the bottom and fit the garboards and all that. And again, Milford was funny. I'm sorry if you're watching Milford. He was funny. he knows it's like the back of his hand, but having other knowledgeable people in the shop, he was almost shy about it. Um, and shy about his capabilities, and he knew it backwards and forwards clearly, but he's not used to working with people who also know it backwards and forwards, and so he kept saying, I'm just showing you the way the old fella told me how to do it, and I was careful not to say, oh, we do it like this or we do it like that. I just let him run, but you could tell he was trying to watch me and see what I would do. And then you get local vernacular, the garbart. That was the good one, if there were a good one. So the material they're working with is less than ideal. One innovation that he has made is he now edge glues the bottoms together, he epoxies them together. He does use some stainless fasteners, stainless screws, but part of it is supply chain. Hamilton Marine doesn't deliver to him. Amazon barely delivers to him, and so a lot of what he's working with is out of the lumber yard, down the street, wood included, by the way. But this was an unusual thing. So this little pattern here is the bottom pattern. On the after side, you trace the inside of the pattern. On the forward side, you trace the outside of the pattern with the midpoint of the boat in the middle. And so it gives you the bottom fore and aft is not the same, but you only need a quarter pattern, if you will, for the whole bottom. And that's what that guy is. A lot easier to store than a half bottom, which is what we have at the shop, a bunch of half bottoms to trace. And again, not unlike Lowell's, the lion's share of the patterns that are on the walls and the ceiling, he doesn't know what they go to. They've been there forever, and they've just always been there. And again, he showed up in 1998, 118 years later. And a lot of these patterns could have been one-offs and never used, but the ones for the Banks Dory, he knows very well, and he's actually remade a number of them to be more useful, or I guess warp less and all that. But he ran a furniture factory up in Shelburne for a long time, making commercial furniture, dining room tables and church pews and things like that. So he comes from that kind of a background. So he's adopted some of that in his pattern making, but again, try to keep the boat building as pure and as real and as accurate to how he was taught by Bill Cox. And this is a curio. So some of you may know, history says at Lowell's, when you set up a dory on the building bed, you plumb the stem to the corner of the house across the street, which was Simeon Lowell's house. Here in Shelburne, you plumb the transom with a level, but you plumb the stem to that piece of wood on the door there that Sidney Mahaney screwed to the side of the door. So, truth be told, we actually screwed that to the side of the door because the one that had been there blew off with the door in a hurricane like 5 years ago. The whole door disappeared and flew into the harbor. But Milford was saying, we used to do it this way with the piece of wood stuck to the door there. You can see that door is very new looking. So we decided it was within our reach to screw another scrap of wood to the door, and that's how they would plumb the stem. And again, the relationship here between Mick and Milford is just a glorious thing. I wish Mick were here giving this talk. I wish Mick were here in a Santa suit. It'd be perfect. But he's the most gentle guy, and he knows the process not as well as Milford, and he still is very deferential to Milford. But I'm sure in the absence of Milford, he can walk us through it almost as well. And I put this in because it's interesting. They've got the whole process figured out, but fitting seats is still kind of shooting in the dark here. They cut it a little bit, they put it back in the boat, they cut it a little bit more, which to me seems odd considering everything else is so well figured out. Maybe that's because the boats end up a little bit fatter, a little bit skinnier every time, depending upon how much they spring in when you pull them off the building bed. And again, you can see more in the book. The building bed is original to 1880, I think. It's had thousands of dories come off of it.
What's that goop on the other side of the bridge things?
How do I get back? Can I get back? Oh, yeah, look at that. Hey, the goop on the other side of the clinch nails. Oh, right here?
Yeah.
That's just DAP window glazing, so putty. One of the benefits of using these clinch nails is that the round head of them, you can really set the nail in, which leaves you room to putty over the outside. And then when you clench them over, it kind of breaks the wood around it, and you can putty on the inside. So you get a nice smooth surface, which is good for painting and all of that, but it lets you cover the nail heads on the copper rivet boats that we build. A couple of years, in saltwater anyway, the copper oxidizes, the paint falls off the nail head on the inside and falls off the rivet or nail head on the outside and rivet on the inside. But here, after 10 years, it starts to rust and you start to get rust streaks and it kind of goes to hell. But you spend a good half a day going around and puttying everything, and everything gets putty. We did not paint this boat, but it did eventually get painted and end up in New Brunswick somewhere. And this was the second to last boat Milford built. He had one more order after we left. And some of the peculiarities. So this is Cricket's special talent. He did a lot of tried to do a lot of drawings, and you can't ever capture the whole thing while you're there, as much as you try. I captured a lot of the things that were differences, but now this is now a year and a half ago, and your remembrance of it isn't the same as when it was a week ago. And so in my mind, I'm like, oh, I remember all these things that were different. And it's fortunate to have four people there with four different perspectives, so that you do get every aspect of it. It's like doing a shoot with four cameras. You get all the angles. And Cricket was really good at this kind of a thing, because I'm gonna have to build one of these next year. I'm teaching this at the Wooden Boat School in August, building this boat. And these little details are going to be hard for me to remember when I'm there doing it. But I'll have the book. And there you go. Rows like a dory. It's funny to watch these guys row. They row differently from canyon rowing than regular old dory rowing. But they are beautiful boats, and the simplicity of the shape and the construction is I think some masterwork, and these are very well built boats. Again, some of the peculiarities. Milford stopped using oak for the outwhale because the boats aren't going on schooners anymore. They don't need that strength. They don't need that durability, I suppose. And let's see what else. It's kind of about it as far as his differences. And I thought too, you can't really see it, when I first started cutting the noses off of dories like that, which is very much a fishing dory thing, I ended up with these two nostrils in mine, and I was like, oh man, I did something wrong. I don't know what I have to do here. But then Milford did it, and I realized that that's just the way it is. You put putty in there and you paint over it, you never know. And then, oh man, I did it again. And this is the book coming out. So again, it's at I guess it's at press now. It's in the proof stage, so it'll be printed and be available hopefully by the first of the year. It'll be on our website available. It's not going to be in your local bookstore, but hopefully it'll be available through Wooden Boat and all the outlets that you know and love. But definitely always be available from Lowell's Boat Shop. And then the future is, I believe, next fall. Our plan is there's a dory builder out west building river dories. Same situation as Milford. He's getting older. He doesn't have many boats left, and so we're going to go out there. We're going to build a boat with him in November. I realize this might be news to a lot of you. This is news to me as of the last couple of days. Speaking to my board and organization here, the hope then is to do this in the Lowell's fashion, and for me to build one, hopefully with George Odell, and then record it, but also have others there to do it, the recording, because I don't necessarily know what everybody else doesn't know when I'm building, and sometimes you need those questions asked of you to get them down into print. And then there's a tradition in Lunenburg, clearly Nova Scotia, which is again, the purity of that is unknown. And then there's actually the St. Pierre Dory tradition, building of St. Pierre dories, which would be another one to record, albeit they're very different, but they're still interesting. And they even build them up in Newfoundland. So the goal is to do that. But I have been if you're familiar with the Dory book, it's been a resource and a Bible for me for the last 20 years. I've been collecting dories because I haven't seen them all, but I've seen a lot of them. Dories that are unique and interesting to me, anyway, or at least seem unique. I've been trying to collect those to get the lines off of them in the hopes of making this a bigger publication with a lot of drawings and such, like the Dory book, with a couple of how-tos and the different traditions, and sort of build upon that to, I guess, to keep it all going, keep the mission and the dream alive, and keep people building these boats. I think that's it. You guys were the initial talk for this. I haven't done this one yet, so. Wait, 15 minutes? Oh, 40 minutes. Any questions?
So they use oak on the transom of that boat,
Yeah, it was red oak.
and then
Heavy scantlings, by the way. So I would use a 1-inch oak transom. They're using 1.25 inches.
okay.
The frames are 1 1/8 inches. It's all very heavy.
And so there's a knee below that, right?
Yes.
Okay. And is that just cut out with a bandsaw, or is that like a natural piece of wood that they'll use?
No, the angle is such. It's almost a 45-degree angle, and so you can get the grain running across it pretty easily.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not grown. And there's always a couple of nails, clinch nails across the toes where the grain runs out to hold it together. But really, once the boat's together, it's not doing a whole lot.
Right.
It's really there to hold the transom on while you plank, and then once you're planked. And the other thing about it too, again, these boats are brilliant in their design and simplicity, but the garboard wants to pull away the most right there and right there, and you've got a nice big piece of hardwood to put a nail into to hold it in back there at the transom.
Yep.
And that's one of the primary functions, again, of that knee.
So what do they use for the sides? What
Pine.
type of pine?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Pine, and they did ahead of our getting there, he and Mick got all the planking out, planed to thickness, and epoxy filled all of the knots and all of the voids and there was a lot of epoxy in that boat, because the Milford complained the entire time about the wood that he can get, and can't ever get any wood, and he's driving over here and driving over there for it, and he's got a mill. I think when we were there, he had wood ordered or sitting at the mill and I don't know if the mill got burned in the wildfire or something, or not. It was in danger anyway. He was like, "Oh, the fire's up there, but I don't know if the mill's okay."
Wow.
But anyway, he's a constant complaint about the quality of the wood that he's getting, and a lot of time spent filling it with epoxy.
How thick were the logs up planks and the sidewalks?
The bottoms were an inch, and the sides were 5/8. Yeah, they haven't switched to metric yet, which is good.
What's the finished old way?
19.6 overall. Again, same as one from Lowell's. And the designs, every part of it is so similar that it makes you wonder if Isaac Crowell, made a couple of patterns and escaped up to Shelburne to build them. Anything from online community?
Yes, Wendy Schmidt is sharing applause, standing ovation for your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. No questions?
Hi, Graham. Did he discuss that cutoff nose with you, right at the top of the stem?
Sure. So a couple of reasons for it. The first of which is if you had a big stem head there, as you see most boats have today, that would bounce up and down and hit the schooner and be a place for lines to get caught. Here, the fishing line can go over the rail and slip right over the nose without catching on anything.
Right.
The other reason for it is if you're going to end up with a stem head like that, you have to take great care to fit the shear plank into it. You have to, spend some time cutting the bevel up at the stem head to get the shear plank to fit just right. Here, you can bevel that stem all the way up, plank it to where the planks end, and then just cut it off right there at the bevel, and you never have to worry about that. So it's just time efficient as well. But it doesn't bang up when you run into your schooner, it doesn't put a big dent in the side.
Right.
So in the heyday of schooner fishing and
Yeah.
the dory fishing fleets, were they more or less a standard length size?
Yes and no. This is what would be called a double dory or a haddock dory. And again, there's a lot of this vernacular that's been lost to time. I've seen advertisements for Lowell's advertise bluefish dories and mackerel dories. And those, I don't know what the different variations were, but they range in size from, talking length overall, 16 to, in this case, 20 feet, sometimes bigger. But they all had to be the same size on a boat, otherwise they wouldn't, fit inside each other. But there were singles and doubles. And if you were a single, you'd have a smaller dory. But I think by the time, by the 20s, they were all just the same length.
So this boat, a boat that size, what fish did they put in the thing before they had to go back to the?
I wish I could show you pictures from Adventure here or some other thing, but a ton of 1,000 pounds of fish anyway. 1,000 pounds of fish and 1,000 pounds of guys and gear and all that kind of thing. But you'd see them almost, coming back almost a wash.
Yeah.
If the conditions were right, and that's part of the design too. So those thwarts aren't fixed. The cap rail here, the gunnel, is connected to the frames by these metal clips, and the shear plank's nailed into it. But there's a lot of flex in this boat. So if you got 2,000 pounds of stuff in it, and it's banging up against the side of the schooner, if it were built rigid, it would crack and break and fall apart. But if it was flexible enough that it would, bend and bounce right back. And these, over time, if you leave the thwarts out of it. So in our case, we built it. We had crossballs on all those frames until we got the gunnel in, and the cap on, and the outwhale on, and that kind of locked the shape in, and then we could take them out. And I remember we took one of them or took them all out maybe earlier than Milford wanted to. He had a lapse of memory, and the boat sprung in a little bit. He was shaking his head about that for 3 days. So um, they will move an old dory. When you see old dories that are sitting in the yard and falling apart, they get skinnier and skinnier and skinnier as the frames lose their structure and the rails straighten out, and it just brings the sides of the boat right together.
We have another one in the chat that wants to know about differences in building methods between shops. I'm wondering if there is an indication that the shops were intentionally setting themselves apart from one another, trying to improve on what they had seen coming out of the other shops, or trying to be original.
Depends on the time period you're talking about. I think into the 20s, each shop, and I say each shop, the ones at Salisbury Point and the ones in Shelburne were doing pretty much the same thing. And the process was so rote and ingrained that there wasn't a lot of innovation going on. They just, they were doing it and doing it as quickly as they could. And then it seems to me that Shelburne didn't change much really in the 20th century, and Lowell's changed a lot, pivoted quite a bit to remain relevant. And so nowadays, if I went to build a traditional dory, a fishing dory like this, my process wouldn't be that much different than what Milford did. But if I go to build a boat like we build now in the shop, the process would be not vastly different, but there are a lot of improvements in modern materials and things that can be incorporated that that they don't incorporate up there. And so, but there are a couple of processes here in the Shelburne dory that are more thought out and more refined than what would happen at Lowell's. And I think that is how it was done, how it was always done, and not improved upon. I just think at Lowell's, we sort of lost that refinement when we stopped building, 1,500 boats a year. And so now we're not having to figure it out every time, but there are a lot of, we have a lot of old brown patterns with pencil marks on them that you can't read. And in this case, Milford has taken those old patterns, made a lot of new ones that he can read. And so in this case, go back a little ways, one of the things that I'm thinking is, here you go. He knows where the shear plank's going to fall already. And he's got the circle board, as he calls it, already screwed to the transom. In our case, I wouldn't put that on, and it's a pain to fit. I wouldn't put that on until I've got my shear planks on. I know where they're going to fall. But that's because for each size dory, I don't know where the shear plank's going to fall because I don't build enough dories to have that be uniform. If I were going to build, 3 or 4 of the same boat, then I would figure that out on the first one and I'd replicate it for the next 3. But I've built, 4 or 5 dories in the last 10 years. So bank stories, that is. Yeah.
You probably know this. And I'm curious, 2 things. One is where you got the connection. The other thing is that as you change materials, a lot of things change. When I worked on some very old boats, galvanized clinch nails with pipe, white lead pipe. The only effects are the obvious ones, but the white lead pipe mixed with that galvanized iron glass. Really
Yeah.
wonderful stuff. Terrible for kids to eat at that. But, really did an amazing job. I remember taking nails on people that were at that time 60 years old.
Yeah.
White lead.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether that, I mean, you probably knew that. If you didn't, there it is. And,
I'd like to incorporate that, but I don't know where he's getting his nails, unless he's working from kegs that he's been in the shop for 50 years, which is entirely possible. Yeah, don't tell Gino, but I've got kegs and nails in the shop, but they're all in the archive now.
Yeah. I figured since I turned 50, they'll both shop with me.
Yeah, you'd be fine. If you eating red meat and ice cream, you don't have to worry about it. Anybody else?
What was Harold's question? I could hardly hear him.
Oh, Harold was saying Harold started by saying he's old.
He's not.
He was saying that he's taken old boats apart that were built with galvanized fasteners that were covered over with white lead paste, which obviously is not something that we can use anymore. But that combination preserved the nails in such a way that the 60-year-old fasteners that he was taking out were as good as the day they went in.
Yep.
And so I guess he wanted that to be known in case anyone wants to build one of these with white lead paste. I was shocked at when was the last time anyone drove a 16 penny galvanized nail with a hammer? It's been a long time for me anyway. And the whole garboard is fastened with them, and they hold extraordinarily well. They just as well as a ring nail. Over time, not so much probably, but I was amazed at that. And again, Milford hasn't built a bank story in 3-4 years, I think, when we went up to do this with him. And he was looking around for the nails, and they weren't there. And he sent Mick out to go to the hardware store to get galvanized 16 penny nails. So it's readily available for him there, those building materials.
Yeah, in use in the fishing fleet in the old days, these boats were in and out of the water.
Yeah.
Constantly. Did that wet dry cycle affect them, swelling and whatnot?
I mean, if the dory were sitting there, if the schooner were sitting there for a month in the sun, then yes. But the guys on board, they would have been in the water most days. But in the days that they weren't, they knew enough to throw a bucket of water in them to keep the bottom swelled up.
Right.
And then in the off season, who knows? But again, the way that they're built kind of takes that into account in the way that the football shape of the bottom means at the ends you don't have very much wood, and so the swelling and shrinking cycle there doesn't affect a whole lot, and those are your main leaking points. It's really the middle seams where the bottom boards are really wide that they would tend to open up. And in this case, that's the low part of the boat. So when you have the rocker, so any little bit of water is going to sit in the middle because the bottom's bent fore and aft that way, and keep those swelled up where it matters. Whether it's by accident or by design, it's kind of the perfect cacophony of errors, if you want to call it that.
I didn't call
it that.
Yes.
Now
that Milford retired.
I have heard through the Coconut Telegraph that there's a younger woman who he's training, who's in her early mid-30s maybe. And they've been through a few boats. I forget. I know Brad's been back to see him once, and somebody else had been there. But that, she's basically taking over. And so Milford, let's see, it's at the end of the day, it's getting hard for him to stay on his feet. And he this guy works. He goes home. He's got a workshop in his backyard. He makes, mass produces, I should say, these little fishing boat models and whirligigs and all kinds of gift shop stuff that sells. And if you go to a gift shop in Peggy's Cove, you're going to buy Milford's whirligigs, you know. And so this is a summer gig for him, and I don't want to say it's a light lift, but all winter, you know, he gets up in the morning, has a cup of coffee, and he goes out to his workshop and makes sawdust, making these things. And I think that's how he's, you know, paying his bills at this point. I tried to export them. Very, very. The border doesn't. The border scares Milford and export, but I've got a whirligig with 4 schooners on it like that goes around. You know, it's pretty good. Might look good. Okay, I got you. I see you. I see you. Christmas is coming. But anyway, they're really well done and something to certainly to be emulated. And I don't know how much longer he can do that either. And he's got there's cottage industry, quite literally. He makes all the things, he puts them in a box, he sends them to his sister in the next town over, she sands them, paints them all pretty. He's every couple of months he goes and drives around, drops them off at the Fisheries Museum of the Atlantic and the Lunenburg and all that kind of thing.
You did the dory really one?
This one? Yeah. Yeah. Of course. And that stuff's genius. I mean, he's a savant in that kind of way, and that kind of stuff that he's making is it's really nice and it's really brilliant. You know when you go into a gift shop and you see the model and you're like, you know, he's like, see his and you're like, oh, that's really nice. And again, Milford, I hope you're not listening. Very reasonably priced. So I bought one from my nephew at the gift shop here in Shelburne, and it was like $14 for a Nobi fishing boat model that big, all nice and painted and you know, looking realistic. So anyway, Milford in a nutshell. Any more over there? Great. So look for the book and come see us at Lowell's for sure. And I hope to do a little bit more talking about this, and then I also hope that this project will continue year in and year out. It's not, the proceeds from the book roll back into an account that just feeds more of the project. So it's not no one's buying a house on book proceeds these days. So every book purchase is essentially a donation back to the project. How do you like that?
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Graham.
Katie.
Thank you, Graham.
And thank you all for coming. For those of you who made all 6 talks, I'm really impressed that you kept coming back day after day. And if you have not signed up for our newsletter, do so, because we will be offering more things like this, pop-ups throughout the winter season. Our next book of classes in this space is actually CPR, first aid, and AED courses. We'll be running 2 every month, 2 Mondays and 2 Saturdays every month, January, February, March. So be on the lookout for that. I know all of us mariners actually need to have it, and it's good for anybody to have. So keep in touch, keep checking us out, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.